Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Wesley, for that repeated invitation to come here and talk. I am blessed with this opportunity to always be able to decide what I want to talk about, and I'm trying to find things that are interesting for you as students, and also not boring for Dave and Wesley, who hear me now since 11 years, and also for myself to find something interesting to research a little bit and find out how to explain to you. So my lecture tonight is very simply structured in talking about myself, who am I, what do I do, talk about navigation and about the creative space, because that is what I want to talk about, and then show you some case studies where I think designers have used that creative space successfully. Who am I? When I talk to you and introduce myself, I can show a photo which is completely redundant because I'm standing here, you can just look at me. I can tell you details, for instance, that I'm a 95 percentile, that means 5% of the male population is taller than I am. And this is just as a warning because it shows you how facts are sometimes overrated. This is a scientific fact, but it doesn't make you know anything more about me than a redundant detail of my physicality. So be aware and don't overestimate scientifically proven facts because they only paint a small part of the picture that we as designers have to be interested in. That's my background, and I made it deliberately colorful so you see I have German parents and a German passport, but I was born in South Africa. I have Swedish ancestors where my funny family name comes from. I've often traveled to Italy. I once did a 2-month bike trip from Stuttgart in Germany to Rome. I'm a resident in France. I've lived many years, 14 in Switzerland. And I've done an internship, spent half a year in London, England, so that has influenced me. I love to spend time in California, particularly at this time of year, because the Californian winter is better than a Hamburg summer. And I also spent a lot of time in South Korea because I was participating in an exchange program for designers for 1 month, and I did this 3 years in a row. So I'm quite fascinated by that country too. That is something that gives you more information about me and tells you a little bit more where I come from. This is to tell you what I've spent my life in. So the first 6 years I was, as Brits would say, just farting around, playing. And then I went to school for 12 long years, partially boring. In Germany at the time, you either had to do military service or civil, and I opted for the civil one, so I worked a year in a hospital. And then I studied design 8 years. I changed schools in between. And during the time, I did an internship at a design company in London called Pentagram, that also had, at the time, a place in New York and now in San Francisco and elsewhere. And after I graduated with a diploma, I got hired by Frog Design, where I spent 5 years. And then I joined Art Center's European campus. Art Center Pasadena at the time had a campus in Switzerland, where I was department chairman. And during the time I opened my design office, which I now have had for 34 long years and still enjoying it very much. And since 12 years I'm lecturing. So I'm not teaching permanently, but just this annual thing here for the moment is all I need. And I like to have the contact with students. I like to be abreast of developments, but that's what I'm doing. Now, yet a little bit more. These are things that I spend time with. So I like to make noise with different instruments. Please do not ask about my level of proficiency. I'm a beginner. I'm just above punk rock level with 3 chords, I like to eat and I like to cook. I like to read books, and that is the most interesting book I read last year, The Hands of Time, by a woman that had a degree in horology and is a clock and watchmaker. Very interesting if you're interested in watch design or clocks, and how did we start to measure time. I like to watch movies. And I like to travel, I like to ride and ride a bike and make cocktails. So you see, those are not scientific facts, and yet I bet that after looking at that, you have a better idea what kind of person I am, or at least you think that. What do? I do design. And before I start getting into the lecture, I want to share with you my definition of design, because as I like to quip, if you ask 3 designers for the definition, you'll get 4 answers. It's a fairly young profession, so it's okay that it's not that established, that there's one unified, generally accepted definition of design. Here is mine. So design, I understand, is a professional activity to develop innovative solutions for specific markets or brands by way of an iterative process involving analytical and synthetic steps. So I'm not talking about my love of beauty here, but that's an important thing too I do in design. So you see, finding a definition that is complete is very difficult. To speak about it in detail, it's professional, and you have to sometimes remind clients, because I'm charging money for that, you know. They say, oh, it sounds like you're having fun, Wolfgang. And of course I do, but I still want to make a living on that, so sometimes that gets forgotten. Then you're developing, it's not happening on its own, you know, you are actively doing something that where the result will be a product. Then you're not going to do the same old, so it has to be an innovative solution. And you know, the difference between invention and innovation, you've learned that, I bet. It's difficult enough to do innovation. Invention takes a lot longer, but even innovation, it's not something that just all of a sudden comes across. Then you have to do something that sells, because when you want to get paid, your clients have to make money with what you're doing. And considering that the investment, if you look at the investment to make any product, say is X, then it's 0.8% of that amount that is invested in design. That said, when people purchase a product, it's 75 to 80% of the decision making depends on the design. So I think design is a very good investment, and I can assure my clients, before even asking them what they want me to design, that yeah, they can be better off once I've designed their product. The product has to have an identity, and the identity has to fit the specific client. I'm not designing something and then looking for somebody to buy my design. I wait until somebody approaches me, or I propose to somebody, you should do this and this for your company, for your brand. And it's an iterative process, just means nothing else than it's step by step. So it's not something where I say, well, you give me the money, and after some time we'll meet and I show you the result, but I will tell the clients I'm going to do that process, that step after that step, and there's this benchmark meeting where I'll show you the results of the first phase, and then you'll give me feedback and so on. So I line that all up for my clients to understand what they are investing in, and they want to know that. Then you have to really emphasize this process towards your clients, because they shouldn't get the idea that you're going home now and you're watching TV until you get bored and then you may have some ideas, or you're just twiddling thumbs. Ideas may come to you in that way, but an idea is just, you know, a little cloud in your brain, and what you do with that idea, how you develop it, how you make it presentable and understandable, that is a good part of what we do. So the actual idea getting part is a relatively small part of our work. So we have two parts in our, two souls in our body. One is the artist soul and one is the analytic soul. The analytic soul is where you look at a problem and you try to find the question that you want to answer with your design. And that is the analytic part. You know, when you look at some ideas you have had or AI has had, it's then up to you in this analytic step to decide what is good and what is not good. So that is not a creative thing. That needs a different mindset. Actually, sometimes I try to not do these activities on the same day. I'm saying, okay, yesterday I designed all these things, and tomorrow I'm going to look at that and say, okay, which one of that is usable, which one is good or not good. It needs a different attitude. And then, of course, you will create because you are creators. So that's my design definition. I do several types of design, and sometimes it's subsumed under design or under industrial design, but I do a lot of product design. That's what I study. I'm a trained product designer, not a graphic designer, not an interface designer. That's what I learned. I work in the medical device industry. There is that special part of medical devices is that's usually about life and death. If you go into a crisis zone with an ambulance, you are, at least in Europe, not allowed to take so and so many gallons of blood with you without knowing which type you need at the end. Because blood is considered very precious, and you cannot just say, oh, that it'll go to waste. So it's vitally important to keep it at the correct temperature, otherwise you can't take it with you. And so I was designing that with a company in Paris. There's a double-walled container that has special chemicals in there that keeps the content at a stable temperature much longer than your average camping cooler. On the right, you see a pupillometer that is used in emergency rooms in hospitals, where they take a patient and they lift the eyelid and shoot a light flash in, and then they measure the reaction time of the brain, which is involuntary, and that will tell them is that patient brain dead or not, or at what capacity is he working, and then it is measured over time, and you can see whether it deteriorates or not. It looks like your average infrared thermometer, which you get for 10 or 20 bucks online, but this device is $50,000, $60,000. It has proprietary technology, and what is interesting is that the client has one product he sells. So they understood that their old product needed some design upgrade. It was not looking very professional. There was some problem with the cleaning, etc., etc. But it is very challenging to work with the client. It's very smart people. But whenever you want to suggest a change, they say, well, all our income depends on this one product. You're doing something and you are sure that's making the product better, because whenever you do something different than the last time, we want to make sure that it's making the product better, It's a big responsibility, and I understand that. But you have to keep that in mind also when you work with a client like that. You shouldn't say, oh, you always want the same old. Well, they have a good reason. They got big money with their old product. They're making more money than Alessi, the whole company, with one product. And Alessi has how many stupid colored little salt and pepper shakers, That is something to keep in mind when you work with a company. What's going on behind? It's not just the client that thinks, okay, I need to work with a designer. Those are these crazy people that show us new ideas that we don't know what to think about. You have to understand where they are coming from. You have to understand their financial constraints, their technical constraints, their history, what they have experienced before, and you have to respect that. That said, you also have to be able to ignore a good part of that. Otherwise, you will never come up with a new idea. Because if you think exactly like they do, you can come up with exactly the ideas they can come up with. And you're going to be hired to come up with something different, something new, something from the creative space. I don't drink coffee, but I have done a lot of coffee machines. I find the product interesting. I always think coffee smells wonderful. I find the taste is amazingly boring, but that's just me, I do like the ceremony around it. There are people that say, how can you even design without drinking coffee? Then there's people that don't know how to get out of bed without a cup of coffee. So I live with one person like that. So that is a company in Germany doing remote controls for model airplanes. In principle, you can say it's a toy, but you should know that model airplanes are exposed to the same aerodynamic laws as a real plane. Consequently, to steer that plane is as difficult as a real plane. It's just when it falls down, there's not people dying, except if it falls on somebody's head. But the actual trimming, all these modifications, these parameters you have to set are similarly complex. And so designing the interface and the product for the company was a nice challenge. I was involved in a startup called Homage. We did razors. On the right you see a razor, and what I like about that is I had the idea to suspend that brush, which is a beautiful real badger hair from a Mongolian badger, and we try to research how much that poor animal is suffering and does it even need to be killed for harvesting the bristles, etc., etc. So you see this traditional brush hanging magnetically from the stand, and on the side there is the razor with a Gillette Mach 3 blade. And I like the contrast between the old and the new on that. So the respect or putting forward, putting it in scene of that badger brush. On the left, there is a Damascene steel straight edge razor. I designed that. The idea didn't come from me, the idea came from our engineer. He said, we are a young company, we do not have a lot of money to have advertising, but we're going to make the most expensive razor. And we sold that for 20,000 euros, which is more than $20,000. There are only 3 people on this planet that forge Damascene steel into razor blades. There are lots of knives and swords and what have you, but there are only really one guy in Japan, one guy in the United States, and one guy in Germany, a retired smith who does that for fun. And we had to pay him $1,000 alone for making that blade. So it was an investment, but the price of 20,000 was, our PR agency came up with that price. They said, you want to be the most expensive razor there is on the planet. Point, full stop, period. And we managed, and so we got a little article in Newsweek. Do you know how much it costs to get an advertising in Newsweek? So it was totally worth all our time and the money we invested. And then there was a guy from Singapore who sent his wife on a plane and says, yeah, buy me that razor. So it's really smart marketing, I think, from the company, what we did. All I did is create this sheath, which is platinum plated, to really give a good frame for that blade. On the left is a clock. I've really always enjoyed clocks and watches and designing them. And on the right there is a razor for women. It's interesting that the process of shaving is very different for men and for women. Don't take offense, please, when I explain, but men are considered sexy when they're unshaven, when they're freshly shaven, or while they're shaving. Have you ever seen a woman shaving? Because they usually hide. They go away. It's considered like, well, maybe they're not embarrassed, but it's not something they brag about as much as men do, you know? It's not considered a sign of femininity to shave. It's definitely considered a sign of masculinity when you shave. And when you're a teenager and your dad shows you the first time how to shave, you feel like really good about it. You know, that's perhaps not the same with women. I can't talk about that in detail because I haven't grown up as a woman. But we tried to make this process to respect the different views. Also, there are different body parts that women shave. So it's starting with legs, perhaps. So we made the handle a little bit longer. We tried to find a different expression in the shape. So that was a startup. Never took off, by the way. Also interesting. It's only one of 5 startups that succeeds, and I think I should work on my 5th. Sorry, yeah. This is packaging design. On the left, this is packaging for Korea's largest watch company, Romanson. In the middle, there's skincare for that shaving company that I spoke of, and on the right, there is a box. It's a fairly expensive box, but it was for the luxury platinum version of that razor. And we said we want to make a packaging that isn't thrown away afterwards, so you can store your cufflinks in it, or you can give it to your female partner and she can put the jewelry in it, or you can have your male partner puts jewelry in it, or whatever. Or you can store cigars, which is why it comes in a version with a hygrometer, so it works as a humidor. We're talking luxury business here, okay. Interface design. I got into interfaces by designing what happens on the screen in the coffee machine. That's fairly simple, you know, the coffee is big, small, medium, or strong, weak, or in between. There's not that much in terms of variables as with other interfaces that I learned, I was confronted with later. Then on the left you see for the remote control for the model airplane, this is just one of the screens, and it shows you a little bit, yeah, it's pretty complex. But in the middle is the pupillometer, which is how I started working for that company. That again is used in emergency rooms, so you cannot do any fancy stuff there. It has to be extremely readable, eminently understandable icons. There is a millisecond where the doctor looks at it and wants to know what's going on. It has to be, of course, also compatible with people that are colorblind, which 5% of males are. There are websites that help you. Just, you know, you upload your photos with your colors, and it shows you with that the different types of color blindness, with that and that and that color blindness. You see what as a result, and you can still make it distinguishable. The problem is not whether they see blue and yellow. The problem is that they don't see the same color, so there is some differentiation still maintained. On the right is an interface for a company. We have this client, is a client in Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein theoretically is a country. To just tell you why I say theoretically, the Count of Liechtenstein doesn't live in Liechtenstein, he lives in Munich. Liechtenstein is a little side valley of Switzerland, but it does not belong to Switzerland. It has its own country. And in this country is this company that we're working with, and they have companies in Syracuse, New York, in Sweden, in Germany, in Singapore, all over the world. And mostly they are doing laboratory devices, leak detection devices, and when I say leak detection, they can measure one molecule escaping 1 cubic inch per year. That's an incredible high sensitivity. Why is this relevant? Well, it's one for scientific purposes, but also for production. When you work on compressors for air conditioners in cars, you used to just throw that in the bucket. You know, if bubbles came up, you knew it was leaking, you know. That's fine, except if you have to wait 15 minutes and then one bubble comes up. That still means that after 1 year, the compressor will be empty, and then, you know, you have a problem with your air conditioning in your car. So they pump it full of helium, and then they have these extremely sensitive sniffers, and they can sniff if something escapes much faster, so it's more efficient. They also have devices that manipulate processes of depositing vapor on glasses for sunglasses, etc. They have devices that control whether the air is breathable in a crisis zone, or whether it's polluted, or a military, there's a gas attack or whatever. And they asked us to design an interface guideline for all possible devices of all possible companies they possess. And they understood the magnitude. The CEO was incredible. He said, you come for a week, and they briefed us for an entire week. So they showed us different products from their companies. We had to learn how to, you know, detect leaks. We have to get into the system and work a little bit with that. I'd never worked with these machines before, but you know, this can be learned. You should always be prepared to learn. And then we created something that is patentable, and I'm a bit proud of that. So whenever you work with an interface, you typically have a home, a starting point from where you go into all the other options and possibilities that the software allows you. And when you want to go from one side to the other side, typically you have to go back to home and then down again. And we thought of how can we provide a shortcut. So we said, what comes after home? When I'm home, from where? What does the machine do? And we came up with a solution that in hindsight looks very simple and very logical, but it took us some thinking. So we thought, even when you buy a car today, which is a kind of machine, there are settings. Do you want the interior light to be purple or blue? Believe me, I don't think that is a good question, but you have to answer that as a consumer today. So whatever product you have, there are preferences, there are settings. And that's why we have one of the 4 options. We go from home there. The next one is every machine does something that it's built for. Since their devices are mostly observing nature, we call the operation, we created the icon that looks like a little eye. And then, believe me, whatever machine does, something can go wrong, and that you need maintenance. You need a department, an area where you can address that. And then there are things like logs or training videos or basically everything that doesn't fit in the previous 3 categories, and that's under information. Now, when we presented this idea to the client, the engineers said, the marketing people said, what happens if one day we want something more? And then, we said, oh, then you get a screen that has 5 corners, That was, of course, not serious. But we said, no, please tell us, what could it be? What would not fit? Can you imagine anything that doesn't fit into one of those 4 categories? And they couldn't come up with something. So they agreed that this is a good idea, and we went forward. And then we placed them in the corner because we were told that most of these devices would be controlled by tablet computers, touch screens. And we created this, what we call diagonal swiping, because everybody swipes on a screen, that's normal. And you perhaps have inadvertently, or for good reason, to scroll to an area that is placed diagonally, you swipe diagonally. But to use that and say, okay, whenever you swipe diagonally, you pull in one of those corner functions, they could patent that. And clients love that. Patent means it adds to the IP, to the intellectual property of the company, which makes the company more valuable. That's particularly important with startups, because startups usually want to be sold. And to be sold, you want to be valuable. And to be valuable, you have ideas. And the best proof of having ideas is if they are patentable. In that company, there is one guy that just travels the world and buys new companies, which I think is fabulous. It's a really big company. And so sometimes they're confronted with the situation where they buy one of their former competitor. And they say, well, we have the software that we developed with all the functionality, and we don't need to develop that again. We can use the software. But what they call a skin, we wanted to obviously look different than from what our previous company did. So we want to maintain that company's image, colors, typography, etc. And we have to then create just the skin for them. That just shows you, I think if you're slightly somewhere on the spectrum, as people say today, it is helpful to be as nitpicky and precise with these things. You have to define everything. And before you define it, you have to decide what it should look like. It's not there to scare you. You can do that too, I'm sure, given enough time and money, right? Excuse me. But it is interesting work. I love interface design because there is the aspect, the 4th dimension of time. You don't only have shapes and sometimes even things appearing, at least spatially, but you have this time factor that comes in and adds another complexity. Also, you're not really dealing with matter. I'm a product designer at heart. I like to shape things and have something that is tangible. But in between, it can be nice to just do things on the screen, and the result is on the screen, and you don't have to worry about how the material behaves and whether it mechanically works. You can just ignore that. That everything has its advantages. I designed for that company alone over 300 icons. Well, some of them are, these red ones are just icons I haven't come up with a downward arrow. If I would get royalties on that, I'd be rich. But you have to make these icons fit their typography in the style, is in the thickness of the lines, the weight of the lines, all this. And then there are these blue ones, specific signs I created for them. And then there are signs that can be used by other similar products that are not specific to that product, but to that problem. For instance, having spaces under pressure and pressure release, and having gas flushing through something and cleaning it. But here a very specific one, the crystal, that is a crystal is in a crucible, and that's used for depositing vapor. And if that crystal is broken, there's an icon for that, and so on, and so on. I like logo design, best of graphic design. I am not a graphic designer, but I worked as a student in advertising agencies over 7 years, and I enjoy that. It's really exciting and crazy atmosphere. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about typography, which still helps me today. I'm not particularly good at layout if you don't call making an interface layout. I'm talking about a magazine layout, making stuff look pleasant to the eye in a magazine or a newspaper. I'm not good at that, but hopefully I'm good at logos. I enjoy that. The first on the top left, the slogan was the music in you. And I had this note that I put in the letter U, and the client liked that. There's a fashion designer. There's Men of Earth, and the O has a 24 degree of the Earth's axis. And it's a manly man company again. The company bottom left is another startup that didn't take off. But I love the logo I did for them. I mean, you would have not thought that the letters P, A, G, and E can look so similar. And still, I managed to squeeze them around to do that. And then there's Mamquam. That's the name of a river in Canada, I understand. And the client liked that and wanted to start a fashion label with that. And the river is very curvy, so that was the logic behind that. Whenever you work not only on graphics, not only on product, you can consider that corporate design. But whenever you work, even when you work only on a coffee machine, you should consider the corporate design. There is a company, a brand behind it, and you want this to represent all the values that that brand has. And when you're lucky, as I've been in these cases, on the left again, that is the largest Korean watch company. In the middle is that men's startup, where I even came up with the name, Homage. You know, it was a brand for men, men's shaving, honoring the men. I know that in English it's spelled with one M, but the client, an American living in Paris, wanted to have that French touch, because whenever you go into cosmetics, French touch is a good thing. I don't actually know when the French touch is not a good thing, but you can tell me. And Divador, women's luxury grooming products. So in the case of Homage, what does it mean, corporate design? It means I came up with the name. I did the logo, I did the graphic, the packaging, the product, exhibition design, retail design, website design. It means how is the product presented in a shop? How is the product presented when there's a shop in shop? You know, there's a whole, like a little shop in, say, Saks Fifth Avenue or so. Everything is designed, and I could control everything. That's big responsibility. It's also very interesting. Now we go to the point of navigation. Now, navigation, the word comes from a maritime origin. It means to sail, to move forward while sailing, and particularly to knowledgeably move forward while sailing. How do you do that? Well, the first thing before you can go anywhere is you have to know where you are. You know, and there are two aspects I want to touch upon here, because I think for a designer both are important. One is time and one is space. To know what time it is, you need a watch, a clock, or some kind of source that tells you the time. And for location, you need to have knowledge of that, and that gets a little bit more complicated. For the time orientation, it's also good to know what has happened before. On a ship, that's a log. For us as humans, is to be knowledgeable about history. As a designer, you have to know what has been designed before, and if it's for the simple reason not to do the same thing again and think it's your great original idea when it is not. And for the spatial orientation, you need a map that shows features, that shows, every good map has that, like a scale, is this 1 mile, is how much, and it shows aside the features like there's a river, there's a street, there's a town or whatever. You also need to know where is north, and with the help of a compass, then you can get that orientation. So in order to start moving away from where you now have found out where you are, after you have oriented yourself, you need a schedule to plan time forward, to know what are the goals, what are the benchmarks, where do you have to go, when. And then you need direction, and today with GPS it's so simple. Be glad that you don't have to use a compass. And there's one thing I wanted to talk about maps. The great thing about GPS maps is that they show you where you are, because these old paper maps, they don't do that, You have to first figure out where on that map you actually are. That's why, when you go to a park, they usually have this thing, you are here. Yeah, but GPS does that. That's fantastic. We are all going to be so screwed if one day we forget our GPS and we are out in the wilderness. We will have no idea how to navigate. The first time I came to California, to Los Angeles, my colleague gave me a Thomas guide. Anybody knows what a Thomas guide is? Yeah, Okay, good. So it's very irritating for me, because any map in Europe shows a street with 2 lines showing the width of the street, basically. The Thomas guide showed lines. You have no idea, when you're not used to that, how irritating that is. So here I was driving on the highway, thank God, only 55, having the Thomas guide and trying to see where do I have to go from the 10 to 405 and so on. Challenge. But, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Very important in navigation, 2 things. One is tactical. You need a target. You need to know what's your next stop, where you're heading towards. And something loftier, something strategic above that is you need a goal. And we're not talking only moving through time and space. What are you going to do with your life? Where are you going to go on vacation? We're talking about design, or about your life goals in general. What do you want to become? Rich and famous? Good. A Porsche? Fine. But that can't be all, because I can tell you one thing, if rich and famous is your goal, design is a complicated way. There must be something easier, because I'm not rich and I'm not famous, and I've tried. You should really think, what is a worthy goal for you to attain before you can make movements towards that goal. It helps to think where you are. And to navigate properly, you have to first say, where am I geographically? You're living in the United States of America. I'm not going to make a test. I'm not going to ask you to point out, because I see all these YouTube videos where people have no idea what is, and I know I'm in the presence of much smarter people. There is the Mercator map behind, that's the light blue one, and the dark blue shows you the actual size of the countries. The more you go away from the equator, the more there's distortion in the Mercator map. And it's a good idea, because it has some advantages. The thing that I want to explain to you now is that every map has disadvantages and advantages. The Mercator map allowed to show very clearly going west and eastward, going to the North Pole and South Pole was not the prime objective at the time when the map was drawn. Also, it was drawn from people living in Europe, so therefore Europe is in the middle. That doesn't always mean that it's the best idea to do. Okay, you are living in the United States of America, which is pretty big and spans time zones, etc. But geographically is just one aspect. Where are you socially? And I think that's important, because and that's not only you, because you're design students, that is something that catches all of us. We sometimes forget that we are neither the center of the universe, nor are we the norm. That's why I showed you initially I'm a 95 percentile. I'm the kind of guy who needs to duck when the street, they have marquees, some awnings, and I need to adapt to that, because it's not always taken into consideration that they're tall people. And so there are always exceptions. So where are you socially? This is the United States population, and that tiny sliver there, those are the industrial designers, and you are here. So whenever we meet in a place where there's lots of designers, we think we understand each other very well. We know what we're talking about. We all make an intellectual effort to understand the problem. And we forget that there are a lot more people out there that have different beliefs, different convictions, different goals in life, different needs. And when you're a designer, you have to work not only for that little sliver, you know. Otherwise, you're ending up doing only matte black, brushed aluminum, little cute devices, whatever, that are maybe also appreciated by others, but you have to design for the broad masses. You know, that is something that should be your goal. There's a comparison in population size, and as you have 350 million citizens in the United States, or people living in the United States, it may not be the same thing, but it is still smaller than Europe, or India, or China, or Africa, you know. Now, you can say Africa is not a country, and Europe is not a country, but then you have to know what you're talking about. I've been told by Americans that the United States of America are legally less homogeneous than the European Union. So it's not always easy to compare these things. Whenever you're looking for information, and information is putting data in relation, whenever you're looking at information, you have to know that information has different facets. You can look at things in different ways. Yep. So here, that's the population. Oops. Slide. Yeah. That's the population. And you see that United States, although 350 million is a lot of people, and you would perhaps consider them culturally fairly homogeneous, you know, they are all Americans, until you travel to Alabama, you know, or places that are vastly different from California. And you see, well, there's a lot of variety within the United States, as there is a lot of variety within Europe, perhaps even more so, because you at least have one language throughout the United States. The European Union has 11 official languages, I think. And that's nothing compared to South Africa, where there are 22 languages in the country. And Nigeria, somebody told me, even more, and many of them can be used in communication with the authorities. I want you to be proud of California because I love California. And although it's small, it's very important in the United States, but also in the world, you know. Economically, it's like the fifth if it were a country, it would be the fifth strongest in the world. That's remarkable. So you're here, just going back to the orientation part. So here you look at the surfaces of country, and I've put them in this order because to overlap them with the population, because now you can see something that you cannot see when you look at these graphs alone. You see that, for instance, India is brimming with people compared to the surface and the population. It's densely populated, whereas Russia, as Africa, is almost empty. You know, there's a lot of space for not many people. Again, it's worth looking at these things and putting them in relation to find the orientation. Where are you economically? There are different measures, you know, but I've taken the GDP per capita because that gives you a good overview. It does not mean the United States is number one. It's not even number 10. The first ones are Brunei, Monaco, you know, tiny city-states. It's like taking, say, south of Manhattan and saying, okay, how does that compare? Well, because there's a lot of very rich people living in the south of Manhattan. You know, it does not mean that the whole New York is like that, or the whole of the state of New York, or the whole of the United States. But to compare these countries or conglomerates of countries like Africa and Europe, I use that, and you see the United States is faring pretty well. Now, another place to look at is the time aspect. Time is important in design. As I said, historically, what has happened before, because you want to go forward, you are shaping the future. So you have to know what happened in the past. And to orient yourself a little bit in time, I put up these graphs that show, you know, mankind starts with Lucy, and she's way before 3 million years before our current counting. And then the Homo habilis, that's the first time guys were hanging together and said, let's put our huts next to each other. They were not saying that, they were just, signing that. That's the Homo habilis that was really living somewhere in kind of villages is a big name for that. And then people start to walk upright because, you can see better, or what have you, come back with all the back problems. And the Neanderthal and Homo sapiens came very, very late. But what is most amazing, it's only in the last 40,000 years that we've started to use language. So before it was all ooga ooga or whatever, When you think about that, you think, okay, our history of mankind is a long one, but it gets really interesting actually fairly lately. You can imagine what people in 5 million years will talk about us, They didn't even have time machines. So when you look at the period of the last 40,000 years, and you see when the wheel was invented, which definitely had a big importance on our development as a civilization, that was just 3,500 years ago. Mills, so you didn't have to whip your donkey around the mill, but you could use water force or wind power. That is fairly recent. And the same is with democracy. And I put some religious leaders here, the religious founders is better than leaders, founders, to see all that happened very, very recently. And when you look at the last 2,000 years, and you think, okay, Plato was before that, it's before 2,000 years ago, and then you see what kind of development, what kind of thinking went on. You see there was Copernicus, Kepler, and Descartes, when people started to think, well, is the Earth flat? Does it turn around the sun or the sun around us? And all these things. Descartes, very interesting man, is the philosopher who proclaimed, I think, therefore I am. But what I found is much more important. You're working every day on 3D computing, right? You have X, Y, Z axis. Who came up with that? That was Descartes. And when I read that and realized that man's tomb is about 150 meters from where I live, I went into the church and went to his tomb. I thought, well, respect. I mean, somebody had to say, we are taking numbers and we are making these numbers visible in a graph. And for that, I'm creating a surface and then a space. That was Descartes. Amazing man. And then Immanuel Kant, a philosopher. There are a lot more philosophers, and this is a personal choice here. Leif Erikson, the alleged discoverer of America. And then Marco Polo, Vespucci, Columbus, Vasco da Gama, Magellan, all these people that went into these little boats and around the world just to find out where does it end, where does it begin, where is what. Amazing. That's mostly happened during the Renaissance area. Renaissance means rebirth. Very important period, scientifically, discovering-wise, but also artistically. And the era of enlightenment, also important. And I hope we're not going away from that. When you look at inventors, Leonardo da Vinci is like the godfather of inventors. And it's amazing, a man that designed a helicopter before he had the means to build one. His fantasy was so magnificent that he could conceive things that he knew he would not be able to build, but still it would be a good idea, wouldn't it? I would love to take the guy on a ride on a helicopter. He would be so impressed. I went to the Loire Valley in France, and there was a king, François Ier, Frank I, and he invited Leonardo and said, you know what, you sound like an interesting dude, you come here, I give you a castle, you just do what you want, and you have to talk to me from time to time. I'm looking for a person like that. And so I went to that castle where he passed away, and it's a magnificent little castle. It's a kind of very private castle. You see the bed he slept in. You see his workshop is amazing. He had the most beautiful, probably the most high-tech pencils of the time. He had a screen so he could have this light so his models would sit when he would paint them. You see how his mind went into machinery and military devices, and into drawings, and into making fine art, the Mona Lisa, the most famous of it all. So, amazing guy. Then came James Watt, And James Watt basically started the Industrial Revolution with the steam engine invention that allowed unlimited, but in comparison to the previous situation, unlimited power, constant power. So the first factories with conveyor belts were a bit dangerous if you got caught in one, but it allowed to have power there, power at your disposal to run machinery. And the second revolution, with all these guys, the diesel engine, the light bulb, remote control, radio transmission, assembly line, and airplanes, all that happened almost around the same decades, and has an impact on us until today. By the way, The Mysterious Disappearance of Rudolf Diesel is another very good book I read last year. What I didn't know, Rudolf Diesel was an engineer. Everybody knows a diesel engine, the significance being that before that there were steam engines. So if you wanted to attack a country with ships, they could see you coming on the horizon because of the cloud. With a diesel engine, they couldn't. So there was a military importance, and he came up with these ideas before the First World War. He also invented the ice cube, more or less, not the cube, but he was working for a company doing industrial refrigeration when that was in its infancy. And he said, well, if we rig up the machine right, we could use that water not only to cool stuff down, but, to flavor, and we could cool down our drinks, I know this is important to many of us to have a cool drink, and then cocktail making without ice is unthinkable. So here is you. Your identity is defined by these things, by your ancestry to a certain extent, by your geographic origin, maybe to the extent that you want it, do you allow it, by your experiences, voluntary or chosen experiences, by your beliefs, which in my understanding are something you choose, and by your education. So the question is, where do you want to go from here? So what are your goals? What are your interests? Those are things you have an influence on, and you should exert that influence. That is a navigational advice. Now about the creative space. What is the creative space? Well, it's the space in which we come up with ideas, in which we think, and it's not something very tangible, but I like to take this metaphor of the box that we are supposed to think out of the box, Before I get to that, a little thing on creativity, because I know that when you're a young designer, you sometimes worry, can I have a new idea? Is it even possible today to have a new idea? A completely new idea? So many ideas have already been had. How can you be sure? I mean, clients ask me, so you're going to have a new idea or what? How can you guarantee that? And I can tell you, you want to guarantee that. And there comes a time when you have that confidence that yeah, I'm going to have a new idea. You cannot say, I'm going to invent something like the light bulb. That's an invention. But you can say, for instance, it's a realistic assignment. We have a coffee machine and we have different cup sizes. So we want to adjust the height of the place where the cup sits on. Can you come up with 3 new ways how to adjust the size until, well, not next week, you have to slow down the clients, they always want to put pressure, but in the next 2 to 4 weeks, and yeah, you can come up with new ways. Are they all cheaper, better than, no, you can't guarantee that. And nobody knows before they haven't talked to engineers that have started to study that, etc., etc. But yes, you can have 3 new innovative ideas to do that. So how can you always know that you have new ideas? How can you not be discouraged by this pressure? And I want to give you this example. These are the 26 letters of the alphabet. And I read today, and I researched that every day there are 11,000 new books published. Every 3 seconds there's a new book published. And forgive me for ignoring different languages with different alphabets, they're all using these 26 bricks. You have a lot more bricks at your disposal. You are not dealing with 26 letters. You can use materials, you can use colors, you can use surfaces, textures, forms. You have a vast array of tools at your disposal to create something new. So yes, of course, you will be able to do something new in your creative space, which is hopefully outside the box. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with a box. We all have boxes. It means we all have limitations to what we can imagine. What you can imagine is different one. What you can imagine, and it may overlap partially, but just bear with me with this idea of a box. There is a certain contents in the box, but what's much more interesting for me as a designer and as a human is what's outside. And one reason already, the space outside the box is unlimited. Now, what's in the box? The client. The client sits in the box not because he is restricted. He's not more restricted than we are. He's differently restricted. He knows all the things technically and aesthetically that he wants the new product to fulfill. So he knows physics, manufacturing, ergonomics, environmental constraints, and he has an idea about market, brand, image. He knows what he's done before, and he has certain expectations. And that all fits in the box. But now you come and you start to think outside the box. Now the client is a bit wary because the client sees all those dangers lurking outside the box. He says, okay, but make sure it's not going to be ugly, right? Or inappropriate, or expensive, not on brand, or not innovative. There are some things neither the client wants to go nor you. It's not marketable, it's the wrong expression, nice idea, but it's not for us. Or it's not feasible. Yeah, you can produce it, but then it doesn't work fully, you know. I want to encourage you and look at that. That is my map for you. How outside you find new function, new technology, new materials, new appeals or styles or performances. You can use new production, new focus. I'll explain. I'll give you an example for each of that, which concludes my presentation. It's case studies. You have new idea, maybe sometimes just a new idea that the client hasn't had, and he doesn't. Sometimes you present a client and say, "Oh, I didn't expect that." Well, that's always a compliment. You know, that's what you're hired for. But they say, "Oh, wait a minute. Now I have to think. That's a new idea." And sometimes they say, "Oh, it's perhaps more expensive, but I didn't even think about it, so we are making a bigger budget because I want to do this," you know. When the best thing is you come up with a completely new idea. Then there's a new brand, or new operation, or new use. And these are samples, and I'm going to go through one by one to explain to you. And I found these, and they're all iconic designs. Some are from the book, some are not. Starting in chronological order with the Model T designed by Henry Ford and 3 associates. What's new about it is that he had this idea of the assembly line. So when before there were in coach building so and so many people working on that coach or on that car, here he said, no, we're putting up a line and the product moves, and we have the guy who is best at putting the motor and doing this, and the guy is best at putting the door and doing that. So it's more efficient and it's faster and makes the car cheaper, more affordable. And that allowed Americans to be more mobile. So that was a stroke of genius. That was definitely thinking outside the box because nobody had done it before. I like this lamp and I really want to redesign it once. Not because it's ugly, I just think it's beautiful as it is. I just think, well, you know, I don't need the classicistic wannabe Greek column or whatever it is. But I love the lampshade. It was designed for banks that would allow to count money at the same time, long before, you know, German law dictates that there's a maximum light contrast on a desk, which once caused Apple to have a different color, light-colored keyboard on its first laptop computer because the Germans said, no, you can't have dark keys. Too high a contrast between the screen and the keys. I'm German, I know what I'm talking about. These guys can go on your nerves. So long before they had this rule or these laws or these research things about workplaces, people thought, wouldn't it be nice to have direct clear light, but also like a nice soothing green light to have the contrast a bit reduced, and because it's agreeable to the eye. It's just not judging with a meter, not doing a scientific approach, but just saying, sounds like a pleasant idea. The first people using electric motors in kitchens were professionals, The baker making the dough didn't have to sweat anymore, he got a big machine in. And somebody said, no, we can do that for the household too. And so KitchenAid, precisely Mr. Herbert Johnson, designed that in 1918. Now you can go down to Williams-Sonoma, Sur la Table, and you find that same machine, over 100 years old, same design. That is pretty cool. I mean, that is really good. It just works. It just does the job, and it does the job well. It's inoffensive. It's proven. It's cool. I love it. And it created a different market for the product. Now, when we look at this, and you're sitting on chairs that are also made of bent metal, you say, what's the big deal? Before that chair was considered furniture, and furniture was made in wood. There was just no other way to do that. And Marcel Breuer, architect, 1925, said, no, I'm going to use what plumbers use as material, tubes and welding, bending, screwing it together. I create this chair. What I love particularly when you look at how the leather is employed. So obviously leather is a good choice. It's nicer on the skin than the cold metal, wouldn't we agree? And when you look at that, your body only touches the leather when you sit in there. There's a lot of metal, more metal than leather, but when you sit in there, the only thing your body touches is the leather. That's quite smartly made. And it keeps with a very strict form language of the Bauhaus, on a horizontal, vertical, and some angle if we go crazy. Marianne Brandt created this new style, this new look, going away from floral ornament like Art Nouveau, or from Art Deco that enhanced geometric forms, and did something like Dieter Rams did for Braun just 30 years before Dieter Rams did it. I found it remarkable. She was a workshop teacher in the Bauhaus, and is one of the first female designers that I can find work from that is really remarkable and outstanding. So I'm very happy I found the photo of that to illustrate. This guy was a car mechanic, and he said, when I have suspension in cars, uses these springs, and when I use these springs on the lamp, I can adjust it. But what he did, he increased the functionality. So instead of saying, okay, I have a lamp and now I leave the light over there, I'm putting it here, I just use one hand and I move the lampshade over here, and thanks to the spring, the light will follow me. That was a big improvement, and it's the first lamp ever that did that. And the type of lamp I have on my desk, something that in principle works the same as a more modern interpretation, but the principle with the springs and the two hinges and rotating at the bottom and swiveling at the top is the same thing. That was a stroke of genius, an improvement of functionality. This man here, I can just imagine. So he's working in this factory that made marine buoys, and he found that, well, you could put that to good use, these half shells before they're welded together, and he probably took it home and had a barbecue party, and I thought, well, that's a damn fine idea. And they're still doing that. He started the Weber kettle, So to have a new use for something that exists already, that's outside the box. Nobody went to the man and said, we're making buoys. Could you do something in the culinary market for us with this thing? Nobody. He had this idea. He just ventured out of the box into the creative space. The shape is never only the shape. When we are designing, we want ideally that the shape represents what's going on inside. It represents a brand. It reflects it. So there's always an interaction between the function and everything that's behind a product and the shape itself. But sometimes the shape alone is a good idea, and that's the case here, where somebody made a chair with only one leg. And that using a material and a technology that was novel at the time. It was the first. It's interesting, this has a whole history of manufacturing behind it, this chair. I don't know how many ways they figured out and actually employed during the lifetime of this chair to manufacture it. So the first time was hand-layered glass fiber over a form which didn't have any exposure to pressure, was fairly cheap form. You can have a plaster form, a wood plaster combination. They later on did a blow molded version, then they did nowadays you can get an injection molded. Blow molded has a disadvantage, you don't get a high quality glossy surface, which the first one had, because after layering the glass fiber, they put some polyester resin coat on. And today you can get a injection molded, probably much cheaper than the first one in relation. But the shape is fascinating, I find. It's really somebody who made this one swirly, ergonomic looking, but just pleasant shape. One of my favorite products, and a nice designer friend of mine who unfortunately passed away knew Enzo Mari, was friends with him. Enzo Mari is a very austere Italian designer, philosopher, but he did something magical. When I would ask you to design a trash can, what do you think about? Circular or rectangular or triangular or almond shape or whatever, but so and so high that you don't have to, you can throw things easily, and you have a certain volume and that's it. But this man thought about the relationship between the user and the product in a different way. He thought, okay, it's not that there's this product and I go there. He said, no, the product, and that's the Italian translation, it's waiting for me. In attesa means in waiting. So it's friendly, leaning towards you, saying, okay, please throw something in there. And again, that thinking I admire. It's just, if you think what your product can do for the people that are using the products, then you get ideas like this. When we look at the angle poise lamp, is the one that I showed you before with the springs, you think, oh, it must be difficult to improve that. And Richard Zappa had this great idea which was based on using a new lamp technology. So the lamp here is not an incandescent lamp that needs high voltage, but it's a halogen lamp which operates with low voltage, which means instead of having a cable, he said these struts are insulated with these little red details. They are insulators. So there's one pole going through one and the other one to the other, and even if you hold your hands, you're not getting an electric shock. It's low voltage. It doesn't happen, So this takes away the necessity to have a lot of weight, because also it's a lot more lightweight, so a little counterweight would be enough. You wouldn't need any springs. So you really improved the product a lot and created at the same time a completely new look. So that's a new use of technology. Another product that I'm really a big fan. You can imagine that the lamp company didn't say, because most lamps at the time, or that's a regular lamp. You have a cable, you have a light bulb, and you have some kind of a shade. Nobody said, can you make that a little bit more complicated or so? And to be honest, this is not very complicated. All the designer did is he added this disc with that hole. And what he created is a lamp that now has 3 different types of lights. One directly through the hole, one reflecting from the surface to the top, and one making this disc, which is opalescent. This is like plastic. Opalescent make it shine on its own. So it looks like when you go to a conference room and they have 3 of these, looks like 3 UFOs hovering over the conference table. Very easy to manufacture, very cheap to do, and like many ideas that I like, anybody could have done that a long time ago, but nobody did. Which brings me to a little side story of Columbus. When Columbus had discovered America, he went back to the Spanish court, and you can imagine he was totally full of himself, and not everybody took that well. So in one of the meetings with the king, one of the ministers said, okay, Columbus, yeah, found America, good, big deal. If somebody would have given me those 3 high-tech ships, I could have done the same thing. And Columbus just looked at him, and obviously he was prepared, so he reached in his pocket and took a hard-boiled egg out and said, can you make that egg stand on its tip? And so the minister tried and didn't work out, and he said, always fell, it's not possible. And Columbus took the egg and gave it a whack, and it stood. And then the minister said, I could have done that too. And Columbus said, yeah, but I did it. So it's important for you to know it's not good enough to have an idea. You also need to follow through. You also need to do it to give yourself the chance to succeed. And that's what this guy did. Anybody could have put a plastic disc with a hole under a lamp. It's not a big deal, except if you don't have the idea. Here, that's a wonderful example for that target group, right? I'm sorry. Next time I put that here, I can read it better. For the target group, the design office smart aimed at making devices more easy to use for people that have arthritis. You know, when you're getting older, your joints are getting stiffer, you don't want to hold something that's hard, you want it softer. There are all kinds of constraints, and the company OXO, actually at that time that company didn't exist, the manufacturer said, okay, we produce your design. We like that it has these 2 indentations with these these are soft ribs, you know, that's a double injection, there's a hard core, plastic core, and a silicone plastic rubber cover, and these ribs are plastic, so they are provide friction and also elasticity, so much easier to hold. Just found out that it is easier for everybody, and that founded the success of the company OXO. And I like to cook, so when I need a tool, I always look what OXO has, because they are really doing good quality, good design, innovative tools all over the place. And it started with this peeler. It is good to design for people that have problems, for minorities. And when you have ergonomics, you learn that we are all disabled sometimes. When you have a hangover, that's a kind of disability. When you're pregnant, which only happens to half of us, that is also a disability. But I can tell you from experience, when my daughter was born and you go with a stroller into the city, and then you have to have the stroller here, and you have to open the door and push, then you feel very disabled too. So we all are in situations where we are not performing 100%. So to not say, really just for the small target group, no. Products that are easier to use are easier to use for everybody. I'm having these shoes here. I'm not too old to go down the ground and tie my shoelaces, but do I have to? Not with these, So I really enjoy that advantage without depending on it. But some people depend on it, and for them it's even more important. You will say, well, the brand Apple existed when Jonathan Ive designed this. Yes, it did, and it didn't, because Apple was a company, it used to be a small company, always in competition with the big shots from IBM, etc. And then, for political reasons, Steve Jobs left the company, and then he came back. Apple was confronted with a lot of problems of economic nature, distribution, development. So they really needed a product that would mark a rebranding. And that's what he did. And as you know, if you know anything about Apple, it was not Jonathan Ive alone, but under the tutelage of Steve Jobs. That he did that. So it was very important to show that this product, the computer, is not something that you have in the office and you compute about. Steve Jobs had this vision that it was something that you would spend time with to do research, or to do research where you go on vacation next time, to use the internet, to listen to music, to watch a movie, to communicate with your friends. That was before the invention of Zoom. So he wanted this device to reflect the personal character that he saw and thought this product could have in the future. So that was Apple going away from Apple Computer, that was literally the name, from Apple Computer to Apple, without the computer, because as we know today, they also do telephones and music and clouds and whatever. So they didn't want to focus on the computing. So it was a real rebranding, and that initiated and supported it. That is a funny operation. I don't know, you still know CDs, these silver things that store music and turn around. And for the company Muji, Naoto Fukuzawa designed this device, and what is special about it, instead of having, the first CD players were very disappointing. They were produced long before you were born, but they were disappointing for me because they looked like a cassette player, which is even older technology to store music. It's just because of the CD proportion and size, they were, squarish instead of rectangular, and thinner because they could be. And I thought, that is such a letdown. You have a completely new technology to store music, and all you do is give the box a different proportion. That's not a good idea. And this man went much further. He said, well, basically, all you want is a loudspeaker, and you press the disc in the front. And to switch it on, you just pull the cable. That's a very playful way of interacting with the product. So I think I give kudos to this man for having done that. Very French product. Louis Ghost, it's called. After there's Louis XIV and Louis XV, and I don't know the difference between the chairs when I see them. And I have looked at some and think, oh, that's almost the same. They look like this. They have similar shapes and proportions. It's just their ergonomics is usually bad. And Philip Stark, you can blame him for many things, but his chair ergonomics are good. I have this in my dining room in France, and for me it's important when you have people for dinner that you can sit like 3 hours the whole evening and chat and enjoy food and drinks and whatever without you getting, your butt is sore or something like that. And that chair does the trick. At the same time, it's because of the material, lightweight, see-through, it doesn't distract from anything. But it has this reminiscence of these Louis XV and Louis XIV chairs, which makes it very palatable in the, this Parisian apartment with parquet floor and fireplace. And so it doesn't look foreign, it looks like a modern interpretation of that chair. And I like that very much. There is, by the way, a children's version, and it's fascinating because of the material. A child can hardly hurt itself or others with a chair. It's light enough for the kid to carry it. I know that because I gave it to my daughter and my girlfriend's niece and two of my godsons, and my third godson is too young. I have all these godsons. They're absolutely wonderful people, by the way. And these chairs, one guy he's now 16. He definitely doesn't fit in the chair anymore. He still has the chair there because for him it became a memory. So it's a nice thing. I think if design really touches, thanks to its expression, a nerve, an emotion, then it increases a value for us as a person, not a financial value. Finance is not everything. So, and this is my last example, this is just a good idea. There is this fabulous man, Olafur Eliasson, who is an artist, by the way, who works a lot with light, but also with other materials. And he realized that people in countries, particularly in Africa, far away from the electric grid, have no light other than maybe a kerosene lamp. You think, well, that's something, right? Well, kerosene comes with its problems. There's pollution, so for your health, it's not good to sit in a room with a kerosene lamp all your life. There's a risk that it tips over and the kerosene runs out and starts burning down your straw hut, because that's usually not used in particularly sophisticated environments. So he was thinking of an alternative and created this lamp that has solar cells on its back, so you can charge it during the day, and at night you can shine a light, you can continue your education, you can continue to work and make money. In those poor countries, those are important factors for the well-being of the individual and the families and the communities. So he did something great, and he also had this program where when you buy one, you pay a price and somebody there gets it for free. Yeah, that concludes the presentation, and finally I give you some advice as a bit of a wrap-up of what I said before. If you don't know where you are lost, you know? And being lost costs you energy. You can move, but you will not get forward. And it's just like dancing, it's just less fun. Okay, so try to find out where you are. And if you don't know where you want to go, then it's impossible for you to arrive there, because like the box, space is unlimited enough that you will never just by happenstance arrive where you wanted to come, wanted to get. So walking in circles is the same. It's futile. It doesn't get you forward. So that's why my advice is to inform yourself, find out where you are in time, in space, train yourself, and be confident, have a goal, be confident. Because when you have confidence, then, and you succeed, then it wasn't hubris. There's this definition, the difference between confidence and hubris is very simple, you know. When you say something that you plan to do, and again, quoting Steve Jobs, when he met my former boss, and Steve Jobs was traveling the world trying to find the best design office, he said, I want not the best computer design, I want to have the best design, period. So I don't want Apple Computer be the best designed computer. I want it to be the best design. And when you say that and you're like, oh, 28, I was 27 years old when he said it, because I met him when he was 28. We're both the same age, he's just passed away. And it was total hubris to say, oh, I want to have the best design in the world. Today, you go to a design museum, to a design exhibition, you go to a design congress, you guaranteed will hear the name Apple. Why? Because they have the best design. So he has succeeded, which means what he said at the time was confidence. It was not hubris. So I want you to be confident. For that you have to succeed. Thank you so much.